Well, we are here today to do chronic illness and pain and self-care. We'll just wait for people to come on in.
Right
See
on.
that people are arriving in the room already. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Hello.
Hello. Yep, people are coming in nice and quickly. That's great.
Right on.
We'll get started in just a couple of minutes as soon as people have arrived. I feel like we should have some music or something now, but you don't want me to sing. Make yourselves comfortable. Get yourselves situated. Settle in. Um, Sonia and I are looking forward to sharing some content and time with you today. So thanks for being here. Would you like to do you think we should just get started and then people can just jump in?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
um,
I feel like I'd like to be on time today.
right on.
So
All right.
how does
That
that feel?
sounds good to me. Yeah.
All right. Welcome to today's webinar from Heartwood Healing Centre on chronic illness, pain, and self cares. My name is Fiona Smith, and I'm here with the delightful Sonja Stone. Sonja, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hello, my name is Sonja Stone. I'm a Métis Two-Spirit person living on Treaty 1 territory and in the homeland of my Red River Métis Nation. That is Winnipeg. Um, I'm a B.S.W student at the University of Manitoba in the inner city social work program, and I have chronic illness and pain. So I do a shitload of self care.
You really do.
Yeah.
So we're thrilled to have you with us today. Thank you so much, Sonja. My name is Fiona Smith. I am a short-term and long-term therapist at Heartwood Healing Centre. Um, I am a mixed race settler, originally from England, now situated on Treaty 1 territory, and homeland of the Métis Nation and Dene people. I know that there's more to that. I'm not looking at the sheet, and I will get better at saying all of that, I promise. Um, However, I'm thrilled to be here today. And I also live with chronic illness and pain and have done for over 15 years. So, with no further ado, let's get started.
Mhm. So let's acknowledge the land and honor it. Heartwood Healing Centre is on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dene, and Dakota peoples, and the homeland of the Red River Métis Nation. One particular issue right now is that the water that runs through our taps comes from Shoal Lake 40 First Nation, and the city of Winnipeg does not pay for it. The Shoal Lake 40 First Nation um, gives us water for free, and I think that is a relationship that needs mending. So, part of land honoring is to talk about how there is a lack of honor and respect that exists. We are honored and privileged to do our work here and are committed to working towards reconciliation, uncolonizing, and anti oppressive practice within our organization. This webinar is an example of that. Um, Right now, we're looking at a slide that features a Seven Sisters planting, which would have been and still is a indigenous gardening system used by the peoples that were here and remain here in Winnipeg and on uh, the Treaty 1, Treaty 2, 4, 5 territories as well. So there are seven sisters in this type of planting. One is corn, one is sunflower, one is sunchoke or sunroot or Jerusalem artichoke. Um, one is beans, one is squash, tobacco, and then the seventh sister is the humans who tend to this garden. So this type of um, planting and this type of use of land recognizes that humans are a part of the system that feeds us and nourishes the land and ourselves. So for the agenda, I think Fiona's going to talk about that one.
It's pretty straightforward. These are the things that we're going to talk about today. We've done the land honouring. We're going to talk about agreements in just a moment so that we'll all understand the same page that we're on inside of this space, what you can expect from us and what we can expect from you. And then I will do a grounding, and then we'll get into the, I guess, sort of the meat and potatoes of what we're doing today. Sorry if you're a vegan and I just offended you. Um, but we'll get into advocacy of self, definitions of chronic illness and pain, what that means, how that relates to trauma, and then models of care, because there's a few models out there, isn't there, Sonja?
Yep. Yeah, we'll
And
talk
then
about two major ones. Yeah.
what self care can look like for us as individuals and in our communities, because that's a vital component. So agreements today, just so everybody knows and is clear, everything that happens today in this space towards making it a safe space is anonymous. We ask that everybody respect the space and the confidentiality of anything that is shared by anyone in the space, including ourselves. And so, sort of, it's sort of the Fight Club rules, isn't it? What happens in Fight Club stays in Fight Club. What happens in the webinar stays in the webinar. But there's no threats here, so it's okay. It's nicer. And we do encourage all participants to do what you need to do to keep yourself safe and comfortable throughout the webinar. So your cameras aren't on or anything like that. Grab yourself a cup of Joe or juice or water, whatever makes you comfortable. Sit yourself comfortably, or you can be lying down wherever you are. It'll be about an hour of information, and then there's be some opportunities for some interaction in the Q&A box. And when you're prompted to do that, um, it's yeah, you just chat in the chat box. Really, is where you're doing it. I guess it's the Q&A box, and that's your opportunity to say things and participate in today's webinar. I will have times for questions at the end, and like most webinars, take what is useful today, leave what isn't. Um, Sonja and I are not pain doctors. We are not chronic ill doctors, but we are individuals that live with these kinds of conditions, and uh, we are training and have training and have some life experience is in and around sort of managing humans and living life, I guess, I suppose,
Yeah.
is what we do, really, isn't it?
Managing
Managing ourselves,
ourselves,
yeah.
and then trying to manage the systems that affect us.
And we're going to talk about those, aren't we? Because while they're designed to assist us, sometimes they can be hard to deal with. So we'll get into that. But we do invite you to share your lived experiences and your lifetime practice of choosing things that might create a sense of wholeness for you. Remember, you are an actual expert in your own life and in dealing with your own chronic illness and or pain, or in the caring of somebody who might be dealing with chronic illness or pain. And so, before we begin today, what we like to do at Heartwood is a grounding. And so, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, no matter where you're sitting or situated, you may keep your eyes open. You can close your eyes. Feel free to participate or not participate. It's up to you. But let's begin um, by having our feet firmly placed on the ground or making a connection with, if we're in a bed, some kind of surface or something like that. Take a deep breath, close your eyes, and just feel the breath move in through your entire body. And all we are going to do today is a body scan and to be aware, starting at the head and the neck, of any tension you might be holding in your shoulders. Just give them a little roll right now and just feel. Is there any tension there? And if there is, take a nice deep breath and breathe it out. And as you breathe in, take a scan further down the arms, into the fingertips, through your torso. Is anything hurting today? Is it feeling good today? Do you have room to move today? Anything tight? Just be aware of it, acknowledge it, accept it. Where your back and your buttocks make contact with whatever surface you're sitting on or you're lying on or you're connected with. Just be aware of the connection as you breathe in and you breathe out. And on your next inhalation, as you breathe in, imagine that you're breathing in the sun, the sunshine, warmth. And if that's too difficult to imagine, just let the breath come in and be what it is. Fill you up and exhale. Notice where your knees are. Notice if there's any pain or tension in your knees, in the backs of your legs, in your ankles. Twirl your ankles, wiggle your toes. Any tension in there, any pain in there, just be aware. And as you breathe in, just take a moment to start from your toes and bring your awareness up through the feet, back up through the legs, through the knees, through the backs of the legs. How's it feeling? What's there? What can you feel? Just acknowledge what's there and breathe out. And on your next breath in, allow the air to fill your whole belly and your torso region. And just be aware if there's any resistance anywhere. And then breathe out. And then on our next breath, just breathe in. Be aware of anything that you're holding in your shoulders. And again, give them a little roll. Wiggle your fingertips and open your eyes. Hopefully, you're not too sleepy. Did I make you sleepy, Sonja? Sorry.
A little bit, yeah. Yeah. Always makes me yawn.
That's okay. It means you're getting
Yeah.
lots of oxygen. That's good.
Yeah.
That's good.
Thank you for that.
All right.
So here we go.
Yeah. You're going to start us off and talk about this today, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So Frida Kahlo, a famous person with tons of chronic illness and pain, was a artist in Mexico and had a lot of stuff go on. She was hit by a car in her teenage years and just had just a real problem with getting around, feeling good, doing what she wanted to be doing, which was art and partying, as far as I'm aware. So I thought maybe Frida could be our elder, our ancestor today, where we look to her for wisdom and answers about what to do with our pain, how to live our life in a good way, the way she did. So she said the most powerful art is to make pain a healing talisman. And we thought about what kinds of healing talismans are out there, right? Um, Art is a healing talisman. Pain is one. Self expression, self preservation, doing nothing. That's a very definite healing talisman. Self care, of course. Community care, direct action, and resistance. All of these are arts. They're like practices that you get better at, and they have the capacity to become beautiful as we get better at them. The formal definition of advocacy is the sort that says to get support from another person to help you express your views and wishes and help you stand up for your rights. Um, yeah, we can do that for ourselves, and we often are expected to in our society. It's not a collectivist society that we're living in. So a lot of the work falls on the individual, and that's a lot of what we're experiencing these days is um, we have to show up for ourselves. We have to stand up for ourselves, especially when we live with chronic illness and pain. It means that we've weathered a long storm and we've been managing a variety of unpleasant symptoms. You love that word, hey, Fiona? Unpleasant?
I do like that word unpleasant. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes. I like it because it's used to so formally to describe our pain. Um, and so, yeah, we'll get into that in just a minute. Um,
So, yeah, the once pain shifts from being acute or short term, having an end in sight, um, and it goes to being prolonged, severe, severe, prolonged. Um, yeah, those seem to be the buzzwords. It becomes chronic. And if we're able to be formally labeled as chronic in Canada, the words prolonged and severe are pretty important when we define our everyday normal. So yeah, we'll talk about that more in a couple of minutes.
all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's talk about it. Um, I wonder if there's we'll come to that. We'll come to that. I was just going to ask people if there was ways that they might describe their own pain. I know that the word unpleasant is used formally. I know that the government uses words like severe and prolonged. If there was a word that you could use to describe your own situation, what might that be? This is not a for like we have a couple of slides that says please put something in the chat box right now, but I'm ad-libbing a little bit here. But if there were words that you could use to describe, yeah, um, your own pain or illness, like what kind of words might you use? What kind of adjectives might come up?
For me, maybe I'll break the ice so people can feel brave enough to chat. Um, for me, it's grinding. A lot of the time, my pain and illness is grinding, like a never-ending job, never-ending experience. Um, there's sort of there's also numbness. I find like when I can't
Mhm.
handle it anymore, there's a safe space in my brain I can go to sometimes and just avoid it. Um, and yeah, a
That
lot of the time I feel sad and lonely.
those are really good descriptions, and I think that thanks for sharing that. I think that you talk about going to that place where you can kind of numb things. That's becomes one of the superpowers that we end up using, isn't it, to deal with ourselves. We've got somebody writing in the chat box here: debilitating, endless, broken. Um, these are big words. I mean, they're everyday words, but they when they manifest this way. Um, uh, it's profound in how it manifests for us, isn't it? And thanks for sharing. Those are some of the words. Really appreciate that.
For me, I find like a lot of my body sensations, like there's a brittle feeling or cracking feelings. or tightness and then
Mm,
cracking, like sort of a candy coating that
yeah.
breaks. Yeah.
Yep. I've definitely experienced all of those things that you're describing, as well as debilitating, feeling like it was endless. I've also had the sense that I'm broken as well. Um, but I've learned to reframe that for myself um, through therapy, actually. Um, uh, and there's a number of ways in which I sort of view that, and a lot of it's like I feel broken emotionally but also physically, like it's huge, right? And somebody else has written bottomless, betrayed by my own body.
That one,
That's
that,
huge, isn't it?
yeah. I feel a deep sense of betrayal a lot of the time. Like my body, why is it doing this to me? Um, and yeah, just this sort of like confusion about what is this for? Why? Yeah.
I think it's very normal as human beings to have that very human experience of be asking the why, or the why me. I
Mm.
think at some point when it gets really maybe even dark for us, we sit there in a pit of, like, for me in the past, I don't know about other people, but for me, I know I've been in a pit of self-pity. And it's appropriately placed, quite frankly, because the suffering has been great. And I feel betrayed by my own body. I feel like um, there's nowhere to move. And you wonder if you can go on. But the truth of the matter is, mm, we can. And it's like, it's what Frida's done, right? Um, and we're going to talk about some of the ways that we can do that.
Yeah.
Somebody else has written, my pain is relentless. Oh, my chat is disabled. Sorry, the chat function is disabled. You have to answer in the question and answer. When we do webinars, it's not an option. It's one of the functions that the webinar sets up, that we have to do it through a question and answer kind of thing. Um, and I think it's so that things are done in an anonymous way, because otherwise you can see who each of you are, as opposed to, we are the people that you can see that, and we won't let your identities be, shared with everybody. If that makes sense. So there are formal definitions of chronic pain and illness, aren't there? And some of these, if you were applying for things like the Canadian pension, long term disability, CPP, long term disability, they're looking for you to prove in your application and or your appeal. Very often it goes to appeal, that your condition is severe and prolonged. But maybe you want to talk about the rest there, Sonja.
Sure. So, yeah, pain is a defining characteristic in the diagnosis of many diseases, and by extension, chronic illness. So, that is a statement by a chronic pain researcher, Alaverdi, in a study done in 2020. So, that's not so long ago. Um, it's Pain is often used as an index of the symptoms and activity of the disease and as a prognostic indicator, a predictor of the use of healthcare for the underlying etiology. So basically saying um, pain guides medical practitioners in the way they treat us and diagnose us. Um, the International Association for the Study of Pain and the World Health Organization describe pain as an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience.
There's those words,
Yeah,
unpleasant. And I like
there,
it that we put both quotes up on the slide here, because it's interesting that two different bodies have basically got almost the same definition.
yeah.
Um,
Senses and emotions.
senses and emotions, exactly.
Unpleasant.
Unpleasant.
Yeah.
Really? You don't say. You don't say. Um,
And damage, right? That's the other common word in there
yeah.
is damage. So, and I like the World Health Organization, how they're really taking it a little farther and identifying it as a protection mechanism. So
Mm-hmm.
our pain does have a purpose. It's communicating to us that there's something wrong, something needs addressing, right? And
That's
maybe
right.
we can't fix it, but it's important to thank our pain for keeping telling us, because ignoring stuff doesn't always work out, right?
And it's interesting because I think that we live in a world that wants us very much to ignore our pain or just to make it go away as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Um, and often it's seen as inconvenient.
Mhm.
Um,
Absolutely.
so I really appreciate that the WHO or the World Health Organization also, like you say, sees it as a protection mechanism, and um, and I think that we're going to continue to talk about through our presentation today and our webinar that listening to yourself, listening to that pain, listening to what's happening in your body is essential um, in terms of having maybe I know it's not really a formal, way of approaching it, but like doing a Frida,
Yeah.
pulling a Frida, doing the Frida, doing it Frida's way.
Yeah.
Frida, because Frida wasn't afraid to embody and accept and hold, like she painted it. She showed us, she expressed, she wrote, right?
She showed us her healing talisman. She showed us her pain, right?
She did.
And that's the thing, right? Where pain not only communicates information to us as we're experiencing it, but if we're able to find ways of expressing ourselves and our pain, our experience of it, um, the world will benefit the way we've benefited from Frida's work, right?
That's right. So we have some more sort of statistical kind of information, but it's incredibly relevant. And it's kind of interesting. And it helps us look at, the sort of the macro and the micro of pain and how it's situated globally, but also as individuals. So take it away.
Sure. So Aliverdi also has found recently that studies on pain in children and adolescents have shown that females generally suffer more pain than males. Um, Females report more severe pain, more frequent pain, and longer lasting pain than males in most studies. But we have to remember that um, gender difference, like, is it how we're taught to speak about our pain amongst the genders, or is it literally like, how do you measure pain? This is where we kind of hit um, a bit of a barrier here, is because maybe females are just more welcome to um, talk about their pain or report it accurately, um, and or maybe that it is a real experience, right? Where, I mean, real. Um, is it a physical experience, or is it a um, perception, right? And we do talk about that later, is how do we interpret our pain and how do we communicate about it? So, yeah, very interesting idea that it may be that whether or not it's a physical experience or a perception, females are talking about more frequent pain, more severe, and more long lasting.
Yes. Um, it's an interesting dynamic because females are reporting it, but how it's handled by the medical system is not always it's not always received as well as you might want it.
Yeah, that's a good
Um,
point. So
uh,
even though it's being reported more frequently and more severely by females, it's often treated less as severe and less as uh, and less longer lasting, if that makes sense.
and one of the reasons I bring that up is because in my own pain management past, I've had this actual experience where Um, I, you know, I don't have a problem being articulate and clear if I need to be. And when I go to the doctor, I take a list. I don't waste anybody's time. I go in, I say what needs to be done, I say what's the problem, and I know that, like, we just have a few minutes and we're going to get this appointment over and done with. However, when I was trying to deal with very serious levels of pain that got to the point where I was having anaphylaxis to my pain, like I was having allergic reactions that were so severe, they were hospitalizing me. I'm not joking about this. It needed managing. I would find myself up against a wall with um, doctors about it for lots of reasons. Um, but then this happened. The moment I took my husband to a doctor's appointment and my husband spoke about my pain to a doctor, it was sorted out.
Yeah, that's not an uncommon story.
It isn't, is
Yeah,
it?
people with exact symptoms and complaints go in and get treated entirely differently, um, likely based on gender or some other way of being perceived, right?
Hmm.
So we have to be careful and take care of ourselves
We do.
within systems that carry biases um, and assumptions. Yeah.
We do. We do. And I did not love or relish having to take my husband to an appointment like that. The feminist in me was like having an absolute temper tantrum. However, um, the rest of me that deals with my chronic pain and my illness was like, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
Just do it.
Yeah. Your self-care self needed needed backup, even
It
though
it did.
it was patriarchal.
Indeed,
Yeah.
indeed. Um, and it gets a
So
little bit more complicated, doesn't it? Once if we've got some trauma in our backgrounds.
yeah, yeah. So 20 to 70% of individuals with PTSD report pain-related complaints. Uh, that's according to a bunch of researchers in 2018. I think that's a Chicago study. Am I mistaken?
That is the Chicago study,
Yeah.
yes.
So Alaverdi, the more recent study, identifies that Indigenous peoples in the States and Canada have been found to have a higher prevalence of pain than the general population. Um, so yeah, it may be that intergenerational trauma has a real effect on our genetics. We know that for sure, but maybe there's pain disorders that are associated with intergenerational trauma that have yet to be connected, right, to real experiences. But that's where my mind goes. That's where my indigenous mind goes. Is a lot of the time I've spent a lot of time in my life talking about, like, why am I like this? Like, why am I literally like this? Why am I so sensitive? Why do I experience the world so intensely? Um, and yeah, it might be that literally the experiences of my ancestors and the effects of colonialism, the adverse effects experienced by my ancestors in their childhoods and their adulthoods, um, has affected my genetics so that I'm more predisposed to pain and illness. Um,
Yep. I really appreciate that you shared that perspective and that you're bringing that here. Um, it's interesting because I think we talk about it in a slide later on, but pain is registered by the brain, whether it's emotional, physical, by the same parts of the brain, isn't it? And so our perception of pain, regardless of where it's coming from, is going to be the same,
yeah, yeah.
right?
If we have if we're hurt
We're hurt.
if we're hurt by words, if we're hurt by memories, if we're hurt by stories, stuff
Hmm.
on television, things
Yeah.
we hear, things we come up with. A lot of this time we joke about hurting our own feelings, but literally we experience that as physical pain. Like our brain does not differentiate. So we have to take that seriously, especially when we're um, plagued with illness and chronic disabilities, uh, any additional amount of pain will be significant. We have to remember that we only have so much of a threshold. Um, so yeah, that's where self-care comes in, all the levels of self-care. So, experience of chronic pain and illness. As a social worker in training, I think I am forced and I jump in with a lot of enthusiasm into the idea that we experience pain and illness by ourselves and with others. So, we sort of have this like individual responsibility in regards to our pain. And then we have sort of this like systemic responsibility that we share with healthcare systems, people in our families and communities, all sorts of folks that and things that make up the system we live within. So by ourselves, we have to educate ourselves about our pain and illness. We're not going to get very far if we depend entirely on systems that may or may not be designed for us. Um, we have to recognize that this experience is hard, it hurts, it slows us down. We aren't fully able to deal with regular life most of the time. That's the definition of chronic illness and pain, is that it affects us in such a way that we are disabled um, and hindered. And then by ourselves, we experience uh, sort of a secondary uh, trouble, like the trouble of accessing healthcare. So it's a secondary pain and trauma, pain in the ass, honestly.
It really is.
Um, yeah. So then that moves us along to how we experience it with others. Seems more often than not, even with doctors and supposed experts, we have to educate themselves, or we have to educate them about ourselves and our experiences. Just telling the story should be enough, but um, in Fiona's and my experiences, um, it has to be backed up with like facts that doctors and other folks in the system should already know. Um, but we have to do what we have to do to take care of ourselves, right?
I
So yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I'm reminded when you say that of a client I recently talked to who um, had run into problems where um, the language that we speak in and around this, just even that, the doctors when they're speaking to, you know, the systems that are going to help you have time for sick leave and things like that when chronic illness comes up. Doctors are using phrasings such as labels of disease and labels of illness, and and as patients are then, or clients are then describing the symptoms. And so these two things are not the same. They are the same thing. We know they're the same thing, but they're not landing the same
Mhm,
in these other systems. And so then even the stress of dealing with that, which creates a sense of a lack of, I'm not being looked after, I don't feel safe. And for individuals who come from backgrounds where there might be trauma in their, in the background, or like a CSA background like that,
mhm.
this massive trigger,
Yeah,
right? I'm not
yeah,
being looked after. It's not safe. Um, in just trying to communicate because the
yeah.
language isn't there.
Yeah, I've found that with a lot of the time, diagnoses only capture some of the information about what I'm experiencing, uh, and they don't have room for um, other factors that definitely play a part in my pain and illness, like childhood sexual abuse or other kinds of trauma, right? Um,
Mhm.
I find that if there's a diagnosis within the mainstream medical system, they don't want to hear about other things that may be interfering or making things worse, whatever, right? They can
Mhm.
only focus on what they know. and not what we know.
Yep.
So we have to advocate. We have to
We do.
teach. If we need more care as a result of our traumas or other conditions or life circumstances, our lived realities, um, we have to tell people when we require more care than what they've decided or what the average person gets in these situations. Um, and all the same, we're often left to our own devices if there are barriers that we encounter when we do advocate. So that's a bit of a depressing slide, I guess.
It kind of is, isn't it? But
Yeah.
at the same time, it speaks to the realities of the I think the levels of exhaustion that we feel um, because of the amount of work we become to ourselves.
Yeah, it's like pain and illness plus the pain in the ass that we have to deal with in
Yeah,
order to get that stuff addressed. So it's like having two conditions.
it really is, isn't it? So at this point, was wondering if individuals wouldn't mind sharing your own experiences with chronic illness and pain. Um, you know, uh, especially in and around, self disclosures or barriers you might have experienced, things like that. Because when we share the experiences, it helps others. I mean, we've talked about some of ours, um, yeah, but maybe you'd like to share some of the things that might have happened to you. So just you take a few minutes to type into the Q&A box if you are so inclined. Um,
Yeah, like maybe what does it feel like when telling our stories about pain and illness goes well? What are the stories when it goes poorly?
yeah.
Um, and yeah, just to, like we were talking about this early, Fiona. Um, why does self-disclosure, like telling our story, the story of our pain and illness, why does it feel risky?
Mm,
Why does it feel important though? Like most of us really have a need and a desire to talk about what's happening to us, right? So someone just brings up that people don't understand pain. They label me as sensitive. I get that a lot too. Um, and we probably know, both you and I, that there's a difference between pain and sensitivity, um, and they're they coincide often, but they're not always the same, right?
no, they're not.
Someone else says, I feel like my doctor doesn't have time for my illness anymore when he did before. And now my health is falling through the cracks, and getting all I'm getting is make lifestyle changes, which I've been unable to do. So
Ah,
that brings
ah.
us back to that individual responsibility versus systemic
Hmm.
responsibility, right? Yeah, I've found that that's a thing I hear about a lot.
I've experienced this, and um, uh, I know that we are, and I know it was difficult for me too at the time, and I'm not telling anybody what to do at all. But for me personally, I had to uh, go to that Manitoba list that the province has, where I had to find a new doctor. I just did. I just did because my care was being compromised because what we needed to address could not be done every single time I met with this person in less than 10 minutes. It just was impossible.
Hmm.
And so when you say, I feel like my doctor doesn't have time for my illness, it's quite possible the doctor doesn't in the way that they practice their medicine. That doesn't mean that there are not doctors out there that won't spend that time with you. However, switching doctors is
That's
that
another
that
one.
that's another tax on our personal resources, isn't it? When we
Yes, it
need to
is.
take care of ourselves, right? Um, and so here I'll read the next one. So thank you for sharing these. These are great. Someone said, I have ADHD and complex PTSD, as well as diagnosis of bipolar 2 disorder. once the doctor sees the bipolar diagnosis, they don't listen to the other complicating factors that might be occurring, such as a trigger. Oh, I'm so sorry that this is happening to you. Because um, of how ADHD can manifest. Like I'm just like the educator part. Like I've been a teacher for a number of years prior to doing therapy, and the teacher part of me just knows, um, like all of these things that you have going on together are unique to you and how it manifests for you. So, focusing on one part and one factor, of course, isn't going to be helpful, is it? And so we are always whole pictures. And I think, Sonia, that's part of what we're talking about, isn't it? In systemic practices, sometimes it feels like there isn't room for the whole person. And so we end up advocating so that the whole person can be heard and seen and actually treated.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, so there's a bit of an element of um, the doctor again feels like there's one diagnosis that they can focus on, and then other factors that are important to the person, the patient, um, they're left to that person to deal with. So if you have bipolar disorder that's being treated by a doctor, sure, that doctor might be caring for you in a very good way, but neglecting the parts, the ADHD and complex PTSD that are contributing factors. And so I guess it's the system's expectation that the individual will deal with the ADHD and complex PTSD in a way that improves the bipolar situation. I'm not really sure what the rationale it is, but that's sort of how it shakes down, right? Um, and then our final comment, it's hard to keep friends with a chronic illness. They just
Oh,
can't
yeah.
understand what it takes to live with pain. I don't cancel because I want to, but because I have to. Yeah.
This is huge. This one's huge too.
Yeah.
Um, uh, One of the things that I did in my own advocacy for myself around this, because this was happening to me. So thank you for sharing this, because I think this might be, if not a common experience, it does happen to individuals, but I suspect it might be common.
Mhm.
Um, is I actually learned to vocalize, and it took me some time because I wasn't comfortable doing it at first, but I would just say out loud, I still need to be invited. I need to be able to choose to say no, please.
Mhm.
Because I stopped being invited to things because people assumed that I just couldn't go. Um, and it's still nice to be invited because that still gives us a sense of belonging.
Yeah. We get to
And then
choose.
and that's it. That's it right there. We get to choose. Someone else isn't making that choice for us,
Yeah.
right? Um,
Yeah.
uh,
It's really important to me to say, oh, you want me to show up somewhere? I I don't think I can. My body won't let me, rather than them being like, "Oh, I don't even hear about it because the assumption is that I won't even choose differently, right?"
mhm,
But people can't predict the future. They can't mind read, and they don't know what's going on for us. Sometimes we choose to do fun things even though we know they're going to hurt.
that's right.
And I really want to be given that choice whenever you know, it's my choice.
It
I
is
want
your
I
choice.
want that to be recognized every time. Yeah.
Yeah,
And it is
yeah.
hard. It is hard for friends to understand that because maybe there's some caretaking going on. Maybe there's some ableism going on. Who knows? But those are definitely conversations worth having if the friendship is valuable to both of you, right? Yeah.
And that's the thing, if it's valuable to both of you. I think that we learn quite quickly what are the valuable relationships in our life and what are not. Um, and I know that when I got chronically ill, my world got really small, really fast, like so fast. It was shockingly fast.
Mhm.
Um, because um, uh, I went from being an extrovert to being an introvert, and I never wanted to be an introvert. It was so strange. And now I relish my introvertedness, but when I have it, but I thought it was normal to have, like 8 best friends, who all called me their best friend, and a massive circle of friends, and then all of a sudden I had like 2, 3. Like there was no longer like 35 people who were always just there and always like it was like 2 or 3,
Yeah.
and then actually when it got down to the nitty-gritty, there was 1 or 2.
Mhm.
It turns
Yeah.
out those 1 or 2 though, those or like those 1, 2 or 3, absolutely worth the cultivation,
Yeah.
and worth the efforts. And quite frankly, with how I was feeling, was all the energy I had for,
Okay. Yeah.
at the
So,
time.
yeah, and honestly, a lot of the time, yeah, it gives us valuable information where people, um, how people treat us when we're challenged, when we're in pain, when we're not at our best, right? That I love that phrase, not at our best.
Not at our best.
Um, how people treat us or how people like ignore us or whatever, that's really good information. Um, but yeah, like also, like the like amount of grief that like compounds the experience of a new illness or a new pain experience, that's not fun. So I really wish um, people were more prepared for the inevitability of pain and illness emerging. um, I think a lot of people avoid the idea that we're all going to be getting old. We're all going to have some form of disability at some point in our lives, you know? And yeah, this slide is so funny. It's
It is, isn't it?
exhausting.
Did we mention exhausting?
It's exhausting. Grief is exhausting. Telling people our stories
Is
and
exhausting.
making ourselves understood is exhausting. Telling our stories and not being understood,
And this is
exhausting.
why. This is why we've been talking about this, but here it goes. This is why.
Yeah. Chronic pain and illness requires us to work extra hard just on caring for ourselves, right? It's hard to get up in the morning and do what we need to do to get ourselves up to like a baseline of like able or painless or whatever we're shooting for or whatever we're capable of. It takes work for us to get ourselves at that level of function, um, and the ability to be present in our lives. That's a really big job every single day. And then we add that to a system that doesn't make itself wholly accessible to us while we feel like real bad, right?
Mhm.
So um, the labor required for self care, one, and in addition to the labor required for just taking care of ourselves within a healthcare system, it's a negative feedback loop. Uh, the effort required to navigate healthcare systems can exacerbate the pain we're feeling, exacerbate the exhaustion we're enduring, and the cycle just sort of spins and spins. And we uh, often have a really hard time locating ourselves within that like dynamic whirlwind of pain plus effort plus resulting pain plus effort, etc.
I'll just give you an example from my own life where this feedback was detrimental, and it required a conversation to and self advocacy in order to pull me out of it. I was required to see my doctor. It was every month at first, and then we moved it to 3 months, and now it's every like 6 months. But I was required to see him because of how chronic what I had was, to see him every month. And prior to the pandemic, I had to see him in his office. Now, going out and seeing somebody in an environment actually is something that makes my cells very unhappy, causes me to have a lot of disruptions with my autoimmune disorders. And so when I would go, um, I would be very, very sick after I had an appointment if I, wasn't dragged out of his office by ambulance. That did happen a couple of times, but which was unpleasant. But the care and recovery around my doctor's appointment, now at this point monthly, would take me 3 to 4 to 5 weeks to recover from. Wait a minute, I have to go back and see you again.
Hmm.
And so it was just, I was constantly sick just from one of the mechanisms that was designed to supposed to keep me healthy because I was supposed to be checking in with my doctor. Wait a minute. This is counterproductive. This isn't helping anybody, right?
Yeah, checking in with your doctor to get healthcare was creating health consequences for you.
So,
Yeah. So
um,
yeah, it's empowering and depressing to know this, that our healthcare takes takes a score. Like there's a impact that it has that isn't beneficial. Um, and yeah, there's hours of labor that we put into getting and receiving that healthcare and pain relief. Sometimes I keep track of the hours per week, and it's literally a part-time job.
yep,
Sometimes I put in 10 hours between the phone calls, being put on hold, waiting rooms, receiving treatments, paperwork for claims, tracking reimbursements, rescheduling, doubling
yep,
back often, getting home and dealing with the consequences of the visit or the healthcare interaction. So you mentioned like 4 to 5 weeks of recovery from one healthcare interaction. That is not insignificant. Um, the parking fees to go to places to access healthcare can sometimes add up to $50 a month for me. That's a bag of groceries right now, right?
right.
If you take public transit or cabs, that's probably double or triple that money. So a good week's worth of groceries just to do cabbing or bus fare to the various appointments you might have. And then, yeah, not even mentioning how many of our actual treatments aren't covered by Manitoba Health or employer health benefits. So I think it's really good to give ourselves credit.
Mhm.
People are not wrong when they call us inspiring heroes, whatever the way they refer to us when they really want us to know uh, we're we're living a good life in spite of our problems, right? But it's also really important to recognize that no one should have to work this hard towards their well-being, especially when we're already sick. Just because that system is designed to serve people who usually have a partner or maybe staff who can keep their home and ensure their well-being in many invisible ways. So the mainstream system is currently not designed for anyone who has financial, ability, and time barriers. Um, and this is what is referred to as the medical model of healthcare.
So you just talked about all of these, and I was so lost in what you were saying.
Oh, that's okay.
But yeah, let's talk about we'll talk about the medical model in just a second, right?
So yeah, so all this labor that we put into just accessing healthcare, um, the labor is sort of caused by barriers, right? I don't think it's sort of caused. Our additional labor of accessing healthcare is caused by barriers such as stigma, access, uh, transit issues. Like if like Fiona was talking about how people who take public transit or I think it's accessible transit,
Handy transit.
handy transit. Okay, that's old fashioned. Um,
It really
Often
is.
enough, like if you get handy transit, they don't follow your schedule. So if you have a doctor's appointment at 1 o'clock, the handy transit might not arrive at your house until 1 p.m. based on their schedule or whatever's going on. So you arrive at your doctor's appointment late. The doctor says too late. too bad for you, right? But maybe the transit shows up at 12:30. You get to the doctor's appointment early. The doctor makes you wait for another hour. The transit can't wait that long. You call them that you're off the list. So your ride is screwed up. And the doctor is not going to compensate you in any way, shape, or form. Sometimes doctors even no show on their clients, and they don't charge a fee. But if we no show on our doctors, they can often charge a cancellation fee or a no show fee, right? So the system is not designed for people who have to use transit in any event. That's one of the most obvious examples that we could think about in terms of like real tangible barriers, but also like just being able to access a building if you have mobility issues. A lot of the time ramps are like, a whole block worth of extra steps or walking or rolling in order to get up a ramp or get to an elevator. And yeah, taking the time to access healthcare can often result in a loss of income or just like overall loss of resources. You're taking time out of your day that you'd otherwise be caring for yourself or like maintaining your life just to go to the doctor. Yeah, and there's very rarely paid time for that unless you're privileged with a good employment situation. Does that make
Yes,
sense?
it does make sense. Um, that loss of income, loss of resources, um, it's it the so we're going to talk about this next. We've talked about exhaustion already. We talked about some barriers, and we've talked about some of the things that we can lose. When you put them all together, um, there's something that happens, and there's something that is being experienced. And there aren't many studies about this, but in 2018, a group of researchers did a study, the only one of its kind so far, at that point, of 1,374 inner city low income women. And so very specific. And what they were looking for was to see if there was a relationship between not having enough resources and, um, you know, the study group, the participant group's levels of pain and or personal suffering. So there have been studies done in the past where they've linked not enough resources to exacerbation and or like or even the triggering of autoimmune disorders. But what this study wanted to do was see if it was measurable in people's pain. So interestingly, it turns out that not having enough can in fact exacerbate and make a person's pain as well as a flare. If you have an autoimmune disorder, you know what I mean when I say flare. uh, you know, infinitely worse. Um,
Yeah.
and so, um, let me just make sure I've got all the information here. So found that resource loss is a key vulnerability factor in relation to pain. This is significant. This suggests that um, the most marginalized demographics are hurting, fundamentally hurting. That's what this suggests. And I think that's shocking. And um, I think that's something that we maybe need to start thinking about doing something about. And in the chat box, it says there aren't enough resources. Waiting periods for help can literally take years, and this is a problem as well,
It
right?
caused, like, this study is telling us that waiting lists are a cause or a contributing factor in pain and illness.
Waiting lists are, and I think that I would like to see, if not do it myself, I would like to do a study in Winnipeg, in Manitoba, of what this means for us here.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so this is now on my radar. But because I was like, this was gobsmacking for me, and profound, but makes complete sense, right? And so We know, here's what I have written here. Um, As such, the present findings suggest that the off-reported relationship between PTSD symptoms and pain may involve more complex interplay of vulnerability factors such as not having enough, including resource loss, depressive symptoms, and social undermining. And so, to make sure we understand the definition of social undermining, it is the expression of negative emotions directed towards a particular person or negative evaluations of a person as a way to prevent that person from achieving their goals. So, we're talking about oppressive practices here,
Hmm.
right? And I think in examining our own ableism, I think it's important for us to consider things like wait lists and things like that, like you say, because I don't think that we necessarily think that things like that are oppressive in their existence and in their practice. I think that we think we're opening doors, but actually we may be creating more problems. So this is a very interesting study when it's applied to this particular kind of situation. So at the end of the day, what we've learned here, when we don't have enough of anything, resources, vital resources, which creates a sense of us not feeling safe. We're
Hmm.
going to talk about this in a minute. Um, when we don't feel safe, if we have CSA backgrounds, if we come from places of trauma, intergenerational trauma, and things like that, oh, now we're triggered as well. Now we are absolutely triggered. And once we're triggered, we're now in a cycle.
Hmm.
So, when a client or a patient shows up at a doctor's door who might have multiple factors going on, such as, the individual that says, I have ADHD and complex PTSD as well as bipolar 2 disorder, when that person shows up at a doctor's door, right? Let's say, like, let's say this individual, I know nothing about this individual that's written this, but let's say an individual like this shows up and also is having trouble accessing, um, you know, the transit for the day and or can't get their EI check or something. I'm not making assumptions about anybody's life here, but I'm just throwing that out as an example. It's going to be a very, very bad day and maybe a really bad 6 weeks
Hmm. Yeah, just of enduring
of
the
enduring
of the experience of having a body, right?
just by having a body.
Yeah,
And it comes down to this, right? It's all about how we as individuals are experiencing these things, right? And is pain a sense or is it an experience? Well,
it's both.
it's both, right?
That's what I think.
Actually, pain experts aren't really, the jury's a little bit out. They're not really sure which one it is, but I think if you've experienced it, it's both,
Oh, yeah.
right? Um, and so this is an interesting way to approach it, right? Pain can be learned. It's definitely affected by beliefs, and you touched on this already, haven't you?
Yeah, no,
Expectations, emotional states, and all of that. But Aliverides has studied this and says it's important in diagnosis and treatment. And here's something else that comes up. And so this was interesting too. Like, it is known that psychological disorders increase pain. So we've just established this. While, now, hear me clearly, extreme fear, stress, and shock, like trauma, extreme fear, stress, and shock, the kind that the like individuals are experiencing in Gaza right now, for example,
right.
right?
Crisis.
Crisis and shock decrease pain, right? And that might sound counterintuitive when we've said that psychological disorders, such as, like, and other things like, you know, increase pain. What do you mean? Like this decreases pain? Well, it's not counterintuitive when you look at how the body works and the miraculous brain that we have, and how it copes with those intense situations, right? Um, Especially when there's an actual, we like to use the analogy of a tiger in the room. Tigers come into the room, it's going to attack you, right? Um, these parts of the brain get involved, right? And so we know the prefrontal cortex of the brain, hippocampus, and amygdala. These parts of our brain, They're wired for survival as well as rational thinking and responsible for memory and all these. They get involved. They trigger hormone responses in us like adrenaline. And so when that's triggered, right, we can run so fast, more faster than we ever knew that we could run before. And we can do Superman and superhuman things. You told me about your thumb, didn't you, when we were talking
Yeah,
about this?
yeah,
Do you want to share that? Is that okay?
sure.
Am I
Yeah.
throwing you under the bus with that?
No, no. So I slammed my thumb into a car door about a week before I had to move, and it was a crisis. It was a move um, because of like oppressive systems requiring me to do things I didn't want to do. And I was highly triggered. I felt unsafe. I felt like I might lose my child if I didn't do exactly the right thing and act perfect. So I was in a high state of shock, I'd say, and some extreme fear is probably the best way to describe it. So I broke my thumb. I moved myself and my family uh, for 3 days without really feeling the pain that, and like I'd never broken a bone before. The thumb is like always involved in moving. And yeah, I didn't feel it at all. And then I had to recover from just like chronic grinding pain and like horrible unpleasant sensations for like weeks after I finally calmed down enough, you know. But yeah, the body, the brain protects us from pain when we need it most, when we have to get out of a bad situation, fight our way out, run away, whatever it is. But then um, it comes back with a vengeance, I'd say. You talked about feeling like you'd been hit by a truck after a similar experience, Fiona. My 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 most accurate way of describing it is I feel like I've been hanging off of a helicopter flying around in the air for like a week. I feel like I've been hanging on for dear life. Um, and my body just is so seized up from just like that, I guess, tension of carrying myself around while I'm in extreme fear and distress, right?
Hmm.
Yeah.
I've never heard the helicopter analogy before, but that was a really great visual because I was completely there with you.
Yeah, just
Um,
trying to get carried away to safety, maybe. I'm not really sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, that makes a lot of sense to me, actually. Um, Alaverdi, who has a lot to say about this because he was studying this clearly. He says he talks about psychotherapy in the treatment of pain in relation to this, and he says patients with pain may have had very disturbing experiences in the past, and so we're talking about like using our fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and faint mechanisms there. And he says this event can create links with the memory and senses, and the traumatic disorder may occur at any time when the present experience is once again dormant. And this is because the body kind of keeps score. And I know that there's a really great book out there that's titled something like that, I think by maybe Dr. Peter Levine or Levine. Um, but we know from our experiences, the body definitely does keep score because otherwise we wouldn't feel that, feel like run over a truck, feel like I've been hanging from a helicopter. Um, he also says psychological stress may also cause physical illness. Within the soul, soma, soul sequence, so us as a whole body, an ever growing chain of causes may be present, life threatening diseases as well, not just life threatening events, but life threatening diseases. So this can come up with us with very serious illnesses as well, such as cancer or say myocardial infarction. So if you've had a heart attack or something, or a stroke, or and the relevant medical interventions, and that's huge too. All of the things that are done to your body that are out of your control, that are happening to you, can be traumatic as well, right? Can also lead to mental trauma. And so, traumas, undesirable social experiences, accidents, stressful experiences have been, he says, scientifically proven to be the most common triggers and causes of many physical disorders, pain, and other illnesses that may not have other physical causes.
Yeah.
right?
So,
Um,
yeah. So if we've survived childhood sexual abuse, other other traumas, if our family has endured intergenerational trauma, um, it sounds like that is a clear relationship to the pain we experience and the trauma that emerges from maybe what might be considered routine experiences in
okay.
healthcare.
I've been corrected about the name of that book, and thank you so much. It's Bessel van
That's what
Vanderkolk.
I thought. Yeah.
No, you're right, and it's because I've been reading through all of there's a whole sort of series, between like those individuals, and I attend workshops with them. But you're right, the body keeps score is what it is. Thank you so much, for correcting me in the chat box. I really appreciate that. Yes, they all belong to the sort of same care circle, which is amazing.
Hmm.
Um, but yes. And so these are just some thoughts that Sonia and I had about, coping with all of these kinds of things. Do we need to read it out, or are we good to move on to the next slide, do you think?
I'll
I
move.
feel
I'll read mine. You should read yours.
all right.
Okay, we're traumatized by our experience of chronic pain and illness. It hurts, and we're not in as much control of our daily experiences as others because of our bodies, our traumas, and the way our environments are designed. And they're maintained with a systemic lack of regard for our needs. Um, so yeah, what what
Mhm.
did uh, what did you have to say, Fiona?
I feel like it's important to make sure that we're trusting ourselves. So I felt like I needed to say when the rest of the world fails to comprehend or to adequately meet our chronic illness or pain needs. And that could be for a variety of reasons or barriers. The one person whose experiences we can fully trust is our own.
So, as people who've endured CSA, it
Yep.
can be super hard to trust ourselves. But it's super important when we describe our pain and experiences to ourselves and to others. So, trust yourself.
Yeah. Sorry, I had to really wait for my phone to finish ringing there. Sorry for that. To mute myself. It was awful. Yeah. So like really do trust yourself, right? And this is something I like to say, and we talked about this morning and over the last couple of weeks while we've been doing some things, but I remember what it was like not to be like this. This is where this comes from. I do remember, and I'm sure that you do, unless you were born with a chronic illness, or chronic something. Um, I remember what it was something else, and it wasn't this. And so I find myself saying, I remember when I felt that, and it's not this. So,
Yep. And even if we've never had a time when we weren't experiencing illness or pain, we have good days and we have bad days. And we can try for our good days, even if they're not considered, pain free. Um, we can trust ourselves. Um, the pain is an information system, a warning system, where we can, if we pay attention to it, it may be that we can lead ourselves to a less painful experience, right?
mhm. So let's just take a quick moment here, to share how you might care for yourself or care for someone else with chronic illness and or pain. And while you're doing that, I'll just read out a comment that's in the box and attend to it. It says, I've been diagnosed with functional neurological disorder with PTSD. FND, functional neurological disorder, is just a more modern name for conversion disorder. And then it says, my body does uncontrollable things because of emotions. So that's huge because when I like, I know I've said a bunch of things are huge today because I feel like they are, but when I read this, when this is shared with me, I am struck by um the body and emotions clearly are not separate things in an individual, clearly responding one to the other. And it might be very frustrating trying to keep a cap on these things so that the body isn't doing things that you don't want it to do, right? Um, and I imagine, and I don't want to, pretend I know what somebody's experience is at all, but I am imagining that it is beyond frustrating because your brain is maybe saying, I want to do this, but everything else is doing something else, possibly. And so it's what I am struck with more and more is the uniqueness and the individuality of how chronic illnesses and chronic pain manifests for individuals. And so it needs to be attended to case by case, individual by individual, and that we can't be, brushing everybody with the same, like, oh, you need this medicine brush, right? Or this is going to work for you, right? Um, uh, and genuinely looking at, who the person is and stuff like
Mhm.
that. So, um, yeah. So what we're looking for here is, if you have a minute to write anything, is, what in what ways do you care for yourselves? And are is it effective? Or are you looking for more tools, more strategies? Um, or if you live with somebody that you care for, that kind of thing. What are some of the things that you might do? And it might be as simple as, you know, I have to take a bath every night because I need to be in water. That's my neutral place, right? I hurt less when I'm floating, or something like that. And I
So
can't afford a pool,
yeah. So as folks are writing in maybe what's a good way of caring for yourselves, um, I just want to talk about the labor of caring for ourselves quickly. We're running out of time, I
We
think.
are running out of time. We do have to scooch
Yeah.
ahead. So let's
So
talk about that while people are, if people are
yeah,
going to type.
the labor of caring for ourselves. So we have more than most people. We need daily activities to relax. We need to create and maintain thought patterns, belief systems, habits, and routines that promote our well being and our optimal functioning. We need to be responsible with the use of products by mitigating health risks, um, engaging in responsible consumption of products, services, and health interventions. So we need to think about what we're doing all the time, basically. We need a self-care plan for when emergencies arise so we can access the appropriate resources. We don't want to be constantly telling our stories over and over. And we need those advocacy skills to ensure our equitable access to healthcare and interventions. Um, so yeah, that's basically the work that we just do for ourselves every day, right?
One of the
Um,
parts of my self-care plan is I actually have an emergency self-care plan that's written out, that
yeah,
is that we then took to my doctor, to my one of my specialists, and said, in the event I can't talk for myself, this needs signing by you.
yeah,
And so that, this team knows what to do in an emergency, so we're not running around. Um, and It's been very, very, I'll say this about it, it's just one sheet of paper. It's like with my health care, with my health card, I carry it in my bag. And I have been admitted to usually the Grace Hospital, but I've been admitted to the Grace several times. And when I go in there, the doctors and the nurses in there literally now go, Fiona's here. Where's her cheat sheets? Where's her cheat sheet? Get me your cheat sheet.
right
Right.
on. Yeah,
So, there's that kind of thing. Um, I see some wonderful activities here in the chat box. I plan one activity that I want to do per day. Oh, we're getting some good strategies here. We're going to talk about this in a second, aren't we? I cook one day for 4 nights. Ah,
batch cooking.
planning. This is
Yep.
good. This is good. This is self-care planning right here, isn't it?
Yep.
Um,
They don't expect more than one activity in a day. So the expectation work is huge. A lot of folks really wake up wanting to do it all, and then they're heartbroken when they can only do one or two things or none. Yeah, and it's reasonable to expect that you may not be able to get that one activity done either. Um, yeah, it's just, you know yourself, you trust yourself. It's good.
Mm-hmm.
It's good to have that awareness. Another respondent says smoke weed. It works
Mm-hmm.
not great, but nothing better. Same. I try to exercise, keep my diabetes cared for. I try to watch my sugar, but it's hard as fuck. Yeah, I feel you. It is really hard, especially when we're surrounded by advertising and all sorts of things that are designed to make us crave the things that aren't good for us if we have diabetes.
Mm-hmm.
So good awareness there. And yeah, these are strategies that are definitely things that we're going to be talking about in just a few moments. So the labor of caring for ourselves, there's four elements needed, and there's a ton of intentionality, structure, accountability, and adaptability listed in just these two responses.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so some intentionality can be harnessed through journaling, mindfulness, paying attention to our values, preparing ourselves with interpersonal skills and information. Structure can be achieved with a really good calendar, an app, check-ins with a support person. Um, Accountability to ourselves can be very hard when there's so many real reasons to start avoiding or falling into other less effective reactions to how things are. So living up to our own standards and expectations for me is a reflexive daily practice. I have to keep going back and thinking about what I'm thinking about, what I'm feeling about, and what I'm thinking. Like so many kind of overthinking mechanisms actually really work towards accountability, um, especially if I am able to land on what I value from moment to moment, and that can change if something flares up in an instant. The thing that was important to me just 5 minutes before is gone. And now I just need to lie on the couch, right? So, paying attention to the whole self, body, mind, emotion, spirit, there's a moment when I have to check in and ask myself if I'm able. Uh, am I willing? And I have to honor both parts of that. The physical ability and the mental willingness need to be there. So a lot of willingness is necessary to take all of this on, especially when you're going to be dealing with inhospitable and hostile healthcare systems. Um, and yeah, the management of our resentment around that. So that's yet more emotional labor that we perform on behalf of a system that is supposed to be serving us but isn't designed with us in mind, right? So that system doesn't really engage in a lot of accountability to the individual. It's all based on like budgets and inquiries, etc. But I see how there are alternative systems. A model is out there that we can use to our advantage if only the mainstream would jump into it. And then finally, adaptability. All these things we're talking about for the past hour, um, all about adaptability, right?
I think that's something that we have to learn to be. If we're
Mhm.
fairly rigid, um,
And we
co-
are, yeah. And we get rigid when we're in self-protection mode.
we
When
do.
we're in pain, rigidity is a response that meant to like, provide us with stability and a foundation, right?
Hmm.
But yeah, we have to leverage that correctly. So here are three approaches. I'm going to really go quickly through the last one, but this first one, Gabor Mate, excellent
Mm.
scholar and doctor, says we need to grow emotional competence if we're going to stand our ground and speak truth to power in a responsible, non-victimized, and non-self-harming relationship with our environments. So if we're going to exist in this world, we need emotional competence. And his 7 A's of healing are designed towards emotional competence. So acceptance, no need for perfection, just a real definite need actually for self-acceptance. Always being able to recognize in this moment we're whole, even if it doesn't feel like it. So when we're broken, um, we can still remind ourselves that we're whole, even in the midst of that broken feeling, right? Being compassionate and curious about ourselves as we would approach any person who's suffering. It's very important to treat ourselves with the decency we offer mostly everyone else, right? Awareness. So let's be mindful. We need to be mindful of our logical reality and emotional reality. What is our body telling us? What is the reason? Like, what is our logic telling us? What's our emotions telling us? There's a lot of messaging coming from different parts of ourselves, and it's good to hold an awareness of all of those things in context so that we can gauge our level of distress and our level of ability in that moment. Anger, um, Gabor Mate tells us that when we're unable to genuinely express anger, we get diseased and disordered. So instead, we need to experience our anger and let it inform us, empower us to make choices about how we express it. We talk a lot about self care as a form of advocacy. Anger is one of the most valuable guides in telling us what's right and wrong for us within the system, and what's right and wrong with other folks who might hear our stories and be affected by our illnesses and pain. Um, 4th A is autonomy. Boundaries are important because they teach us to sense and understand how we relate to others. We find our internal sense of control when we have autonomy, and then we're able to express ourselves accurately. Um, that's not to forget that many people, Indigenous peoples, immigrants, refugees, women, children, people with disabilities and illnesses, all of us have been limited in the ways we're permitted to self-determine within the systems. Um, so autonomy is an inside job for sure in the way we conduct ourselves and pay attention to ourselves. But we also have to recognize that a lot of us are limited and herded. We're we're restricted in so many ways by the systems that are affecting us, especially within healthcare. Attachment. So community is very important. Meaningful relationships lead to good health outcomes. So when we're able to rely on people and share about our vulnerabilities, we can feel better and we tend to do more. um, Assertion. So if I'm free to be me, you're free to be you. We need to be centering our radical authenticity, take up the space we need, and advocate for ourselves in order to like access healing. And then affirmation. So self-expression, art, connecting to the universe, finding something that's bigger than ourselves and really throwing ourselves into that all of these things will really contribute to emotional competence so that we can stand our ground and speak truth to power. The next approach that I wanted to bring up is the Indigenous medicine wheel. This is a system used by Cree people here and Anishinaabe people here mostly, um, but also lots of Indigenous peoples across Turtle Island use this medicine wheel. It's a way of checking in with our values, our emotions, our actions, and our decisions. And we're able to use this particular wheel to just track how each of the things listed affects the other parts of ourselves. So the white represents the north. And basically you want to like put in considerations like decisions you're making in the world, things that are like intellectual. In the East, there's a lot of growth mindset stuff going on. That's the yellow part. So anything involving your spirit, you need to take that into consideration anytime you check in with yourself. In the South, stuff like spirit and soul. So how do you connect to things that are bigger than you? How do you heal? Um, and in the West, um, this is like, how do you take care of your body? How do you actually take care of your physical pain? How do you pay attention to like your physical maintenance, eating, sleeping, taking meds, getting exercise, drinking water, all that stuff. And then the third approach is sort of similar, but it's maybe a little more detailed and related to like Western culture. So we have body, mind, and emotion, spirit, relationships, work and school, environment, finances, and technology. Each of these domains is something like it. Each of these domains requires labor. That's that self-care labor we talk about. It's exhausting on its own. This is a 8-item list of things we need to like take care of each and every day to some degree, not all the way 100% each time, but like this is a job, right? And then we have this pain problem or illness. That's another job. And then we have healthcare to like address that. That's another job, right? So we have to keep reminding ourselves that we work really hard. Um, so how do we mitigate that, the harm caused by all that extra labor? I was talking very fast. Um, so let's define ableism and healthism. Ableism is discrimination or social prejudice against people with disabilities based on the belief that typical abilities are superior. So, at its heart, ableism is rooted in the assumption that disabled people require fixing and defines people by their disability. So, we're talking about like two different healthcare systems. One is mainstream, the other is like more of a possibility. I would say ableism is an attitude, it's a very common attitude that people require fixing, right? Um, that typical abilities are superior. That's a very strong assumption built into our current system, right? Healthism. In 1980, Robert Crawford defined healthism as a preoccupation with personal health. So, healthism promotes that it's a person's responsibility to be healthy. If they're not healthy, then they're not trying hard enough. In other words, health is a matter of personal responsibility. So, one of our respondents talked about how they don't get any attention from their doctor anymore. They just get told lifestyle changes, right? That is an example of healthism. How do we mitigate the secondary harms caused by just that one thing that that doctor's doing with you? Is saying change your behavior and you'll be better, right?
I
So
I like to just add to that just a tiny bit because I've been told the same. I was told the same kind of thing like a number of years ago. And I remember saying to my doctor, "So you want me to do more? You'd like me to go places more? Okay, it's not safe. So which swimming pool would you like me to go to?" And I like we were a single income family with two kids, like, and one of them was about to start university. I was like, and is there some kind of program that might pay for that? Because I definitely cannot afford a membership to a pool,
yeah,
right? And it seems to me that when you're being told you need to make lifestyle changes, perhaps what might be helpful is if there was some actual supports behind that. I know that there's not, but like this is part of the problem. This is part of what we're up against.
Yeah.
So, if you're here today, understand that like you've been told that you're the problem. Actually, it's likely that the barriers that you're up against are out there. You've got what you've got going on, and a reframing and a reshifting of this perspective might be in order, because actually the barriers are out there and that's what needs fixing.
Yeah.
Because
And yeah,
like you're not actually broken, you've got something going on,
yeah.
right?
And
and
yeah,
and it
and
requires
that
accommodating, not
yeah,
fixing.
exactly. And this message is like, oh yeah, do more. And if you don't, or if you don't feel, if you do more and then you don't feel better, what else, right?
Hmm.
And it just leaves the onus on us to try again, try again, try again. Well, meanwhile, there are resources out there that we are not accessing. Um, that's that loss of resource, or that feeling of not enough, where,
and
oh, I
that and
guess you didn't do enough, that if you're not feeling better, right?
And that sense of not being enough or feeling enough, if you come from a background where there's trauma or CSA,
Yeah,
oh, that that can be a huge trigger,
yeah.
clearly, right? Because constantly seeking approval, or like seeking approval,
Hmm.
needing approval, and then now you're being told actually you're failing at something
Yeah,
when all you're trying to do is just deal with yourself.
yeah. And yeah, and that the sense of resources being withheld, um, that's devastating, honestly, is knowing that there is help out there, but you just don't have enough to
Hmm.
access it. Um, yeah, I can see how that causes pain just by
Hmm.
saying it out loud.
It does,
So
doesn't it?
yeah, and then they're
So
like, oh, and you just need to reach out for help if you can't do it yourself, right? So
yeah.
when we reach out for help, we
So
encounter the mainstream model, which is the medical model right now. Um, so this is like getting people back to normal is kind of the goal, right? And normal
I
is
hope
not
you're
like,
doing normal like this in
yeah,
quotation.
yeah, I am. Yeah, and
Normal.
let's remember, like, normal isn't our normal, like the way we feel, like a sense of equilibrium. That's not what they mean. What they mean by normal is like statistically normal, not an outlier, not somebody who has extraordinary needs or extraordinary deficits, right? That's what they want us. That's what they're hoping for us, by offering this medical model, is to get us into the mainstream of the bell curve. Um, so some of the features of medical model: disabled people are expected to follow the advice of experts. Experts are not expected to follow the advice or direction of disabled people. Language is clinical and medical and often not accessible. Uh, it encompasses fields of health, mental health, education only. So there's tons more uh, like sites of healing than health, mental health, and education, right? We know that culture is a site of healing, um, self-care is a site of healing, all of that. Community care is a site of healing. The medical model also characterizes disability as an individual and medical problem, as opposed to something that has been caused by outside forces, or maintained by outside forces. The medical model reduces experiences of disease and disability down to like physiochemical factors. So it's not really a social phenomenon to have disease or disability. It's just a body thing, right? And we know that's not true if we experience pain and illness. And yeah, it ignores the psychosocial aspects of health and illness, as we've been talking about at great length for the past couple minutes here.
There's a
Um,
couple of comments in the chat box that speak to this.
oh, awesome.
Yeah, somebody says, "What else? I'm doing everything they say to the best of my ability, but I'm not healthy," with a wah face,
Not
which is
normal, hey?
yeah. And
So
then
sorry.
And then I know, yeah, I'm sorry too. And then adds can't afford life-saving medication because it's been made a trend by celebrities. Oh, oh yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just the fact that medication and treatment is behind a paywall just boggles my mind. Hey?
Boggles my mind too. But I come from England where you get your medicines for free, so it boggles my mind. It always has.
Yeah.
It always has. Yeah, it's an interesting system. But this is the medical model, and clearly it is not without its hitches.
And that's what
Um,
we've been complaining about.
that is basically what
Literally
we're
complaining. Yeah.
literally kind of having a gripe about today,
Yeah.
because it's not person centered. It's
It doesn't work for us, right?
it doesn't.
Yeah.
But here's something that might, right?
Yeah. I think it would work better anyway. And it's designed with improvement and growth in it. So it's meant to evolve. Um, it's the social model of healthcare. So, in the social model of healthcare, critical reflection is valued from and by everyone. So, client or patient, doctors, healthcare staff, anyone involved in policy, critical reflection is required and valued from everyone, I would say. So, some of that looks like that the fact that assumptions are identified honestly by all these people. So everyone comes with assumptions. We can't avoid the society we live in and the messages that we internalize, but we can't deny them, but we should very much be aware of them and be honest about them,
Hmm.
so that we can identify the strengths and the problems with these assumptions. Some of the assumptions will be accurate and appropriate, some of them won't. We need to be able to assess that, right? We want everyone in healthcare to assess that, including patients, including the highest paid doctors, anyone making policy. They need to be able to assess themselves and each other on the strengths and problems with their assumptions. We need to be able to have collaborative discussions about what everyone involved wants and does not want. So, everyone in healthcare, including the patient, has a goal. They have wants and they have things they don't want to happen. I think that it would be very helpful if we had honest conversations about that on a regular basis. Um, how can we make it efficient for everyone in the system? So a lot of the time, the system is pretty barriered to us in order to make it efficient for workers and people making decisions and spending tax money. Um, it needs to be a consideration for the patient, especially people with chronic illness and pain, that we are also considered in this efficient system. Um, and we need to have some kind of mechanism to know that what we are doing is working. How do we know it's working? We need to have some form of observation and measurement, both from the patients and the workers. And then there needs to be a constant sort of review of what needs to be changed so that balance can be achieved between care and control. So care often, if evolves into control, where people who are caring for us become really routinized, and it abuse and neglect can emerge from that type of routine if people aren't being mindful and being willing to change approaches as needs emerge, right? And then there needs to be a constant conversation about how do we apply this to other contexts in life. This whole 1 to 6 item list um, is information. It's stuff we've learned about ourselves and the system we're using. We should be able to apply it to other contexts, like other healthcare approaches, or even other things like education. We need to be able to apply what we learn in one situation in healthcare and make it work in another place. So we're not duplicating effort. Whew.
That was a lot.
Yep. Okay. And then finally, so in addition to like the medical model, in addition to the social model, community care will never hurt. It's very much within our control as individuals in a system. Um, there are tons of issues with accessibility at the moment because cities and municipalities stop funding community places and community things. But I think it's our best hope of achieving those 7 A's that Gabor Mate talks about, achieving the things mentioned in the medicine wheel and then the Western medicine wheel as well. Community care requires accessibility and it requires nonviolent communication and it requires other skills that make for safer spaces, such as.
Oops, sorry. I
That's
moved
okay.
my mouse. Sorry. I was ready. There we go. Such as.
So, um, community care uh, can be things like rituals. So there's cultural practices like tea time, high tea, Japanese tea ceremonies. Um, it's a very, very good practice if you're wanting to build community care without a lot of effort, honestly. There's also like smudging, drumming, dancing, praying, organizing together. So we're all mad, right? We're all here probably because to some extent we're pretty angry about how things are. So maybe one of the things we could do next time or like in future webinars is to like create a little bit of a framework for a letter writing campaign or a phone campaign, design a petition or a protest, or other places at heart, other programs at Heartwood could be an opportunity to organize together. There's also community places. So just going to the park and
Mhm.
seeing what's happening. There's lots of programming there often enough. Sometimes there's even shows. There's gardens, libraries, bike hubs, tool libraries, worker co-ops, cultural activities such as hunting and fishing, recreation, so many things to create a sense of community. And some of them are already set up and quite lovely. And then,
What
yeah,
what one of them, for example, if you were over the holidays, um, Sick and Twisted Theatre is doing a pantomime. It's for
ooh,
adults and children. I might have written the script for it. But
oh,
it's very, very accessible in as many ways as it can possibly be, which includes pay what you can, and if you cannot, book a ticket and come anyway.
right on, right on. Um, so how does
Oh,
like
sorry.
can you see? Yeah, you can go to the next slide. That's fine.
Okay, great.
I'd really
Yeah, we should
appreciate it.
speed up here. We have to
Yeah,
finish up here. Yep.
yeah. So, when we think about self-care and community care, how do the activities connect us with community and a sense of belonging, right? So we need to think about what ways might we tend to our emotional, spiritual, and physical needs. Uh, do we need to be solitary? Do we need to be with others and in community? Probably both to some extent. We need to explore that in ourselves and trust what we tell ourselves. And yeah, like basically, there are a lot of opportunities. And even when like, as I was setting these slides up, I was like, there's really not much infrastructure for community care, honestly. And then I was like, oh my God, all these things actually do exist.
Yep.
A lot of them are behind a paywall, but there are ways of getting around that paywall by saying, what is the how do you make this accessible to everyone in the community? How
Yeah,
about survivors of this problem or that problem, or people who have these experiences? Do you have any kind of accommodation for them? And if
that's the
they're
that's the
if
magic word,
yeah,
accommodation, isn't it?
exactly. If these folks, these community initiatives are community minded, they will have an answer, right? So yeah,
True, they will.
I hope you'll give these little blurbs some scrutiny, because there's something in there for everyone. I am really hoping anyway.
I threw D&D night in there.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I forget about D&D because it confuses me.
Uh,
So yeah, so then finally, to round it all up, let's go back to what advocacy is. It's art, self-expression, it's doing nothing, it's self-preservation, it's self-care, community care, direct action, and resistance, right? Caring for ourselves is not self-indulgence, it's self-preservation. And that's an act of political welfare or warfare. Welfare. Yeah, sometimes we do feel like we're at war with the system, right? Like, or that the system is, I don't know, oppressing us, basically. We're not wrong when we feel this way.
but one of the
Um,
ways we can combat that, right, is with radical like self-care and
Radical self-care, and yeah, moving towards community care with people who are like us, like
mm,
people who might have chronic pain and illness are likely going to be our best friends for the rest of our lives if we're having this experience, right? Yeah.
mm, it's true.
Oh, thank you so much. That took a long time. I'm so sorry.
That really did. That really did. But thank you for sticking it out with us, the few people that are remaining. Really appreciate it.
Well, it
We
looks
hope
like there's everyone's left. Like, am I
no,
wrong?
no,
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 wait.
there's still a number of people here.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And so thank you so much. We have a survey for you to fill out. I'm sure one of the things you might say is we went overtime today. Apologies for that.
Sorry.
And
It's my
so
first webinar.
it's it's all good. Hang on, I wanted to go back to this one here and put the survey in the chat box.
Mhm.
Um, so it might even ask you on your exit. I can't do it. Can you grab it from where you
Yep,
are? I
I
can't grab
will.
it. It might even ask you on your way out if you'd like to do the survey. It's quick, it's short, and it helps us make the program better. Um, so if you can pop that in the chat box. We'd just like to thank everybody for being with us today, for walking with us. And so, merci d'être avec nous aujourd'hui. And I'll leave the last two to you.
Miigwech and Marcy.
Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Other than that, that is our webinar for today. Yeah, it's complicated living with chronic pain and illness, but how we reframe things for ourselves, how we connect, how we how we start to advocate for ourselves is a really big part of um, creating that world that you're talking about, Sonja, where we have a life that's worth living.
Hmm. I don't know why I can't paste this link into the chat, but I
Oh, okay.
can't.
You were having problems too.
I'm
So
super sorry. Yeah.
I'll go back to that slide in case anybody wants to do it. I don't know why I couldn't do it either. And maybe what I'll do is I'll stop sharing and then maybe I can share the link. All right. Um, Thank you so much for today. Um,
Yeah.
it's been awesome.
Yeah, I had a good time.
I did too.
Yeah.
I did too. Um, Sorry, I'm just going to grab that link and put it in,
Thank you.
and then we can finish up. There we go.
Yay.
There, I'll put it in the Q&A just in case I need to put it there. Oh, no, I don't need to put it there. I just put it there. So it's in the chat box if anybody needs it. Other than that, thank you so much. Thanks for being here. Um, and that is the end of today's webinar. Yes, join us for more in the series. Thank you so much.
Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.